Edward the Black Prince, legendary figures. And the battles. Crécy in 1346 is huge.
The longbow.
The longbow, absolutely devastating against the French knights. And the Poitiers in 1356, even more stunning perhaps. They actually captured the French king, John II.
Capturing the enemy king on the battlefield? That's a disaster for France.
It's a complete disaster. And strategically, something else happened around then, Calais.
Right. The capture of Calais in 1347. Why was that single port so important?
Location, location, location. Calais is right there on the Channel, northern France. It gave the English a secure foothold, a defensible port they could pour troops and supplies into whenever they wanted. It wasn't just a conquest, it was their bridgehead.
And they held on to it for centuries.
Until 1558, it was absolutely crucial for projecting English power onto the continent.
But things didn't always go England's way, even tactically. Tell us about Black Monday, 1360.
Black Monday. It's one of those moments that shows you just how unpredictable medieval campaigns were. Edward III's army is marching near Chartres. It's Easter Monday. And a freak storm hits. Out of nowhere. We're talking massive hailstones, lightning, a sudden brutal cold snap. Reports say over 1,000 English soldiers and camp followers died. Just like that. Hail and freezing temperatures.
Wow. An act of God literally halting an army.
The psychological shock was immense. Edward apparently took it as a sign. He immediately started negotiating, which led to the Treaty of Brittany.
Where he actually gave up his claim to the French throne for a while.
Temporarily, yes.
Yeah.
In return for getting full sovereignty over an expanded Aquitaine. But of course, the really big interruption wasn't weather.
The Black Death, arriving right in the middle of this period of 1347, 1351.
Yes. And you can't overstate its impact. It didn't just pause the war, it fundamentally ripped apart the society that was fighting it.
The death toll was just staggering.
Unimaginable. France might have lost half its population, maybe 20 million people. England lost, what, maybe a third, 20 to 33%.
So how does a pandemic of that scale change a war, beyond just fewer people to fight?
It shattered the economic basis of feudal warfare. Feudal armies relied on lords calling up their peasants, their retainers, often unpaid, or for minimal upkeep.
The feudal levy.
Right. But when the plague wipes out huge numbers of peasants, suddenly labor is scarce. It's valuable. Lords couldn't just demand service in the same way. The whole system of obligations started to break down.
So you can't rely on peasants for troops anymore.
Not nearly as easily. And this, I think, is crucial. It forced rulers, especially in France later on, to figure out how to pay for soldiers, how to hire professionals. It accelerated the shift away from feudal levies towards paid standing armies.
So the Black Death, in a grim way, helps create modern armies.
It's a major factor, yes. It created the conditions, the necessity for that change.
Okay, let's jump forward. Early 1400s, the Lancastrian phase. Henry V enters the picture.
And Henry V is ambitious, very ambitious. And he looks across the channel and sees France in chaos.
What was happening in France?
Well, the French king, Charles VI, suffered from bouts of severe mental illness. He was often totally incapable of ruling. And on top of that, the French nobility was locked in a vicious civil war, the Armagnacs versus the Burgundians.
So, ripe for intervention.
Absolutely. Henry saw his chance. He lands an army, makes his claim, and this leads to 1415, Agincourt.
Another legendary English victory against the odds.
And utterly catastrophic for France. Not just the numbers killed, but who was killed. Something like 40% of the French nobility died or were captured that day.
That's not just losing a battle, that's losing your leadership class, your administrators, your commanders.
Exactly. It crippled the French state's ability to resist, and Henry V pressed his advantage ruthlessly.
Leading to the Treaty of Troy in 1420, this seems like the absolute peak of English success.
It really was. By this treaty, Henry V marries Charles VI's daughter, Catherine. But the kicker is, Henry's named heir to the French throne and regent of France.
And Charles VI's own son, the Dauphin.
Disinherited, declared illegitimate. The treaty basically handed France to the English crown upon Charles VI's death. It looked like the Plantagenet dream of a dual monarchy was finally real.
But it didn't last. Both Henry V and Charles VI died soon after, in 1422. The English still controlled much of northern France, but then the French revival begins.
It does. And it starts in a very unexpected way, with a figure who becomes central to French identity, Joan of Arc.
Just a teenage peasant girl, right? How did she make such a difference?
In 1429, she manages to convince the disinherited Dauphin, Charles, who's basically holding out in the south, to let her go to Orléans. The city was under siege by the English, a crucial strategic point.
And she believed she was sent by God.
She did. And crucially, the French soldiers started to believe it too. Her arrival, dressed in armor, it was an incredible morale boost. They saw her presence as a sign of divine favor.
And it worked.
It absolutely worked. The French attacked with renewed vigor, and the English were forced to lift the siege. It was a huge psychological blow to the English. They weren't invincible after all.
And that victory had a knock-on effects.
Immediately. It opened the way for another key French victory at Patay, and that cleared the path for Charles to travel deep into English-held territory.
To Rheims.
To Rheims Cathedral. The traditional place for crowning French kings, Charles VII was crowned there in July 1429.
Even though Joan herself was captured later and executed by the English in 1431.
Her impact was already made. The coronation at Rheims cemented Charles VII's legitimacy. It undercut the Treaty of Troyes fundamentally. He was now the anointed King of France in the eyes of many French people.
But the English were still strong militarily. What was the final strategic turning point?
That probably comes at 1435. The Treaty of Arras, this is huge. The Duke of Burgundy, who had been allied with the English since before Agincourt,
Switches sides.
abandons the English, makes peace with Charles VII. Losing the Burgundian alliance was devastating for the English in northern France. It made holding Normandy and Paris practically impossible long-term.
And the war grinds towards an end. But it doesn't just fade away. There's a final decisive battle. Castillon, 1453.
Castillon is significant. It marks the final loss of Gascony-Aquitaine for the English after centuries. But it's also significant for how it was won. Technology. Specifically, field artillery. The French, under Jean Bureau, had really invested in developing effective cannons. At Castillon, they set up fortified artillery positions. When the English commander Talbot charged,
They just got pounded by cannon fire.
exactly, it shredded the English attack. Talbot was killed. It was a decisive demonstration that the age of the mounted knight was truly over and the age of gunpowder had begun. It marked the military end of the war.
So let's pull back 116 years of conflict, plague, upheaval. What's the lasting significance? What changed because of all this?
Well, militarily, it's transformative. The old feudal way of raising armies based on obligation, it collapses. Chivalry is a military code. It dies on those battlefields.
Replaced by
Professionalism. Paid soldiers, trained commanders, disciplined units. And this leads directly to something revolutionary for the time.
standing armies.
The first permanent, professional, paid standing armies in Western Europe since Roman times. Charles V started it, but Charles VII really formalized it, with the Compagnies d'Ordonnance around 1445.
How big were these?
About 6,000 men initially. Paid by the crown, loyal to the crown, not some local lord. This is the beginning of the state's monopoly on military force.
And to pay for them, the French crown had to get much better at taxing its people consistently.
Absolutely. Permanent armies need permanent funding. That required building a centralized tax system, which massively strengthened the French monarchy.
And weapons technology. Artillery was key at the end.
Artillery became decisive. Castillon proved that. But you also saw the continued importance of specialized troops throughout the war. The English longbowmen were vital for decades, and things like the hobblers, fast, light cavalry for raiding, warfare became more complex, more specialized.
What about the political and social impact?
Huge. Even though it started as a dynastic squabble between cousins, the long war forged stronger national identities on both sides. People started seeing themselves more as French or English, rather than just subjects of a particular lord.
So nationalism gets a boost.
Definitely. And in France, despite all the destruction, the end result was a much more centralized state, with the king firmly in control.
And England? What was the fallout there?
England was broke. They'd poured fortunes into France for over a century, and in the end, lost everything except Calais. There was huge dissatisfaction among the nobility. All these soldiers came home with no employment.
No French lands to reward them with.
Right. All that investment, gone. All that ambition, thwarted. It created immense internal tension.
Which leads directly to
The Wars of Roses, beginning just 2 years after Castillon in 1455. The same nobles who fought in France turned on each other back home. The end of the 100 Years' War directly sets the stage for England's own bloody civil war, a real domino effect.
What an incredible, complex story. We've seen the tangled roots in Gascony, the sheer disruption of the Black Death pushing military change, Henry V's near conquest, Joan of Arc turning the tide psychologically, and finally, this military revolution with artillery and standing armies reshaping the state itself.
Yeah, it really covers so much ground.
Yeah.
And maybe a final thought to leave people with. Think about what this long struggle did to the idea of a kingdom. It started with claims based on who your grandmother was, ancient feudal ties.
Right, bloodlines and inherited rights.
But by the end, especially in France, you see the emergence of something different. A kingdom defined more by a centralized government, funded by national taxes, defended by a national army, and maybe, just maybe, starting to be held together by a shared sense of national identity.
So the war itself helped create the very thing it was fought over, in a way.
In a way, yes. Which raises that fascinating question. At what point does a claim based on centuries-old inheritance like Edward III's become less important, less relevant than the emerging political will of a people starting to see themselves as a distinct nation?
That's a powerful question, and one whose echoes we can probably still hear today. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're the place where we tackle these really big, complex theories, pull together the research, and basically try to give you the core insights fast. Today, we're taking on, well, pretty much the entire human lifespan. We're trying to decode it using Erik Erikson's really remarkable psychoanalytic roadmap. Okay, so our mission here is simple: get you up to speed quickly but properly on Erikson's stages of psychosocial development. And look, this isn't just, listing age ranges. It's about understanding those fundamental psychological and social conflicts, the crises that we all face throughout life. We're diving deep into the main 8 stages, plus that really important later addition, the 9th stage.
Yeah, and it's definitely a theory that deserves this kind of deep dive. Erikson's work, which was expanded later on by his wife and collaborator, Joan Erikson, was a huge step beyond classical Freudian psychoanalysis. Erikson actually started out studying with Anna Freud, but he pretty quickly broadened the focus way beyond just psychosexual drives. Freud basically thought development was, well, mostly done by the time you hit adolescence.
Right, that was kind of it for Freud, wasn't it?
Pretty much. But Erikson, he developed this post-Freudian theory focused on psychosocial development. He really stressed the ongoing dance between our inner psychological needs and, the demands and influences of our social world, our environment. And crucially, he saw this happening across the entire lifespan right up until we die.
And I think the idea that really hook you in, or at least it hooked me in, is that accumulative effect.
Right.
Like how you handle the conflict in one stage. The good stuff or the bad stuff left over, you carry that forward. It actually shapes how you tackle all the challenges that come next. It's like building a psychological foundation, layer by layer, your whole life.
Exactly. It's a cumulative process.
Okay, so let's really unpack this thing. Where should we start? Maybe with the basic mechanics, how these stages actually work. All right, so the whole structure rests on these 8 stages, or, well, eventually 9. And each one is defined by what Erikson called a psychosocial crisis. Now, crisis sounds, pretty dramatic, like a total breakdown. But that's not quite what he meant, is it?
No, not exactly. Crisis here means more like a necessary turning point, a critical period of increased vulnerability and heightened potential. It's an unavoidable conflict that arises at each stage between 2 opposite forces.
Okay, 2 forces. What are they?
Well, on one hand, you've got an internal psychological need, maybe even a biological push. Something inside us is ready for a new step, like developing independence. And then on the other hand, you have the demands or the expectations coming from the outside, from society, culture, parents, teachers.
So like the toddler wants to do everything themselves.
Right. That's the internal push for autonomy.
But the parents need them to, not run into the street. So society puts limits. That tension is the crisis.
Precisely. That negotiation, that tension between the internal need and the external social reality, that defines the crisis of the stage.
Okay, so each stage presents this kind of tug-of-war, like trust versus mistrust.
Yeah.
But you mentioned something earlier that seems key. The goal isn't to completely wipe out the negative side, like getting rid of all mistrust. That feels a bit weird. Why wouldn't we want that?
It's a really subtle but important point. A successful resolution isn't about eliminating the negative pole. It's about achieving a healthy balance that leans heavily towards the positive one. So, you favor trust over mistrust or autonomy over shame.
Why keep some mistrust, though?
Because, well, you need it. You can't navigate the real world safely if you're completely trusting of everything and everyone. You need a little bit of healthy skepticism, a capacity for mistrust, to recognize danger or untrustworthy situations. The aim is just for the positive quality trust, autonomy, initiative to be the dominant force, the default setting, if you like.
Okay, that makes sense. So you navigate the conflict, you find that positive balance. What's the payoff? What do you gain psychologically?
You acquire a specific basic strength, or, as it's often called, a virtue. This is an enduring psychological quality, like a tool, that helps you deal with the rest of your life.
Ah, okay. So for trust versus mistrust, if the baby develops that fundamental trust.
They gain the virtue of hope. And hope isn't just wishful thinking. It's this deep, enduring belief that your desires are achievable, that the world is fundamentally okay even when things get tough, and that hope then becomes the psychological bedrock for tackling all the later crises.
And if you don't resolve it well, if mistrust wins out.
Well, those challenges don't just vanish. Erickson believed that unresolved conflicts tend to reappear later in life as ongoing problems. It makes successfully navigating the subsequent stages much harder because you're carrying that psychological baggage, that deficit.
Which brings us back to that lifespan perspective being so different from Freud. Freud basically thought your personality was set in childhood. But Erickson's saying, no, development keeps going right. Even if you mess up a stage, you don't just get stuck there forever.
Exactly. You don't fail stage 3 and just stop developing. You move on through the life cycle, but you might carry, say, unresolved guilt from stage 3, which then impacts how you approach stage 4's challenge of industry versus inferiority and so on. And he had this really fascinating idea about time, too. He saw the stages as linear for each of us, birth to death, but for society, he saw it as circular.
Circular. How does that work? I'm trying to picture that.
Okay, think about the bookends of the lifespan. Stage 1. Trust versus mistrust in infancy. Stage 8. Integrity versus despair in late adulthood. Erickson suggested that when an older person achieves ego integrity, they look back on their life with a sense of meaning, acceptance, peace.
Yeah.
That integrity actually serves as a model for the new generation, for the infants just starting out. It reinforces the baby's budding sense that life is trustworthy, that it has coherence and meaning, it fosters hope.
Wow. So the wisdom, or lack thereof, of the older generation directly impacts the foundational trust of the youngest.
That's the idea. Conversely, if the older generation is largely filled with despair, bitterness, regret, that feeling permeates the social environment, making it harder for infants to develop that basic trust. It makes the world feel less safe, less reliable.
So it's not just about my internal accumulation of virtues or deficits. It's also about this intergenerational feedback loop.
Exactly. And as you said, that very first virtue, hope, gained way back in infancy, it really does influence all the stages that follow. It sets the emotional tone for the entire journey.
It's like the seed crystal for everything else.
You could put it that way. Hope is that fundamental belief that things can work out, that your needs matter, even when you face setbacks. Without it, every later effort, trying new things, forming relationships, contributing to society, reflecting on your life, it's all going to be shadowed by a kind of basic pessimism or fear. The virtues build on each other.
Okay, let's trace that journey then. Let's get into the stages themselves, starting with those first 5, the ones that really build the foundation during childhood and adolescence. Stage 1, hope. Trust versus mistrust. This kicks off right at birth, goes up to about, 1 year old, maybe 18 months.
Roughly, yes, infancy.
And the baby is just completely dependent, right, on caregivers, usually the mother initially, for everything: food, comfort, warmth, safety. So the crisis boils down to, can I rely on this world, these people, to take care of me? The big existential question is super basic. Can I trust the world?
And the answer really depends on the quality of that caregiving. If the caregivers are consistent, warm, reliable, they respond to the baby's needs predictably, offer comfort and security, then the infant develops basic trust.
It's not about getting everything instantly, though.
No, it's about reliability. Knowing someone will come, that needs will eventually be met, that consistent care leads to the virtue of hope, that feeling that, yeah, my needs matter, things can be okay.
And I can really see the connection here to other theories we've talked about, like Bowlby's and Ainsworth's attachment theory. That idea of a secure base, it sounds a lot like Erickson's trust, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. There's a very strong parallel. That early attachment experience, whether it's secure or insecure, really echoes this trust versus mistrust dynamic and sets a pattern for future relationships.
Okay, but we said before, you need a little bit of mistrust. Why would a 1-year-old need that? Seems like they should just feel totally safe.
Well, think about it. Life isn't always safe. A little bit of wariness helps them learn caution. Maybe it helps them discriminate between familiar, safe caregivers and potentially unsafe strangers. or recognize obviously dangerous things later on, like a hot stove. But the key is balance.
Right, so if that balance tips the wrong way, if care is inconsistent, neglectful, maybe abusive,
Then mistrust becomes the dominant force. The infant develops this pervasive sense of frustration, suspicion, anxiety, a feeling that the world is unreliable, maybe even hostile. And that lack of basic confidence can be a huge hurdle for forming close relationships later in life.
okay, moving on quickly then. Stage 2, Will. Autonomy versus shame doubt. This is toddlerhood, right?
Yeah.
About 1.5, 2, maybe 3 years old. The famous terrible twos.
Exactly, often called the no phase or the me do it phase. The crisis here shifts. Now it's about gaining control over their own bodies. Think toilet training, a classic example, but also developing motor skills, learning to walk confidently, feed themselves, maybe try to dress themselves.
Yeah, my nephew is right in this. Everything is I do it.
Okay.
So the question changes from can I trust the world to something more like, is it okay to be me, to be independent?
That's a great way to put it. Is it okay to assert my own will? And this is a really tricky stage for parents. Our sources really emphasize how crucial parental patience and encouragement are here. Well, if parents allow the child to try things, to explore, to make choices within safe limits, even if they mess up, spill their juice, put their shoes on the wrong feet, the child develops a sense of autonomy. That feeling of, I can do things, I am capable, I can handle problems.
And if the parents are too controlling, or maybe ridicule the child's attempts, like making fun of accidents during potty training.
That's where shame and doubt creep in. Shame is that awful feeling of being exposed, inadequate, judged. Doubt is that hesitation, that fear of trying, that feeling of, I can't really do this. Constant criticism or over-control really fosters those feelings.
It sounds like a real balancing act for parents. You mentioned sources highlighting the risks of extremes. Too much control leads to dependency or maybe later rebellion.
Right, or the child might become compulsively neat and rule-bound out of fear.
And too little control, just letting them run wild.
That could lead to impulsivity, recklessness, maybe a lack of consideration for others or for necessary rules later on. They need supported independence.
This is also where you see them start exploring their own interests, right? Like banging on pots and pans as music or getting obsessed with dinosaurs. They need that exploration validated to build that sense of self-efficacy, which leads to the virtue of will.
Will. So the determination to exercise free choice and self-control.
Exactly. Okay, next stage. Stage 3, purpose. Initiative versus guilt. This is the preschool or play age, roughly ages 3 to 5, maybe 6. The child has got some basic bodily control now, and they're ready to take on the world in a more purposeful way.
How does that look different from the toddler stage?
They're not just asserting me do it. They're starting to plan things, undertake activities with a goal in mind. They're learning more complex skills, maybe helping with simple chores, learning to count or tie their shoes, figuring out basic concepts like gravity because things fall down when you drop them. Play becomes much more imaginative and role-based. So the existential question expands again. Now it's like, is it okay for me to do things, to move, to act on my ideas?
Precisely. Is it okay for me to make things happen? You see the surge of energy, wanting to initiate projects, ask endless why questions, explore, maybe even take some risks, and they might pretend to be a doctor, build a fort, organize a game.
And if this initiative is encouraged, if they're allowed to explore and try things out,
Then they develop the virtue of purpose. This is the courage to imagine and pursue valued goals, to feel like their actions have meaning. But the opposing force here is guilt.
guilt. That sounds like a heavy one for a 4-year-old. What kind of guilt?
It's often a new and confusing feeling for them. It might be guilt over things that don't seem logical, like feeling bad about aggressive thoughts or fantasies, or feeling guilty just for asserting their will if it clashes with the parent's wishes. This is partly because they're starting to internalize rules and moral standards from their parents. It's the beginning of conscience, really.
So if their attempts at initiative are constantly shut down, if parents are dismissive, overly critical, or make them feel like their plans or questions are silly or annoying,
Then that pervasive sense of guilt takes root. They might become afraid to try new things, overly anxious about doing something wrong, or perhaps swing the other way and become overly aggressive or defiant out of frustration because their natural drive is being blocked. You might see them trying to test boundaries, like trying to cross a street alone, which involves learning self-limits, or lashing out physically if their plans are thwarted.
okay, that makes sense. This really sets them up for the next big shift, doesn't it? Moving into the wider world of school.
Absolutely. Which brings us to stage 4, competence. Industry versus inferiority. This covers middle childhood, the school years, say from age 6 up to puberty, around 11 or 12. Now they're entering the structured world of school, peers, learning formal skills.
So the crisis shifts again. It's not just about me and my plans anymore. It's about how I measure up in the world of people and things, right? The question becomes, can I make it out here? Can I do things as well as others?
Exactly. School and peer interactions become incredibly important arenas for comparison. The focus is on learning the skills valued by society: reading, writing, math, teamwork in sports, following rules in games. It's about producing things, completing tasks.
So if the child is encouraged, if their efforts are praised, maybe for a drawing, for solving a problem, for helping out, what happens then?
They develop a sense of industry, which leads to the virtue of competence. This is the feeling that they can master skills, that they can make things and complete tasks successfully. It builds self-confidence, diligence, perseverance. They learn the pleasure of work, essentially.
And the dark side, inferiority.
That comes from repeated failure or constant criticism or feeling like they just can't meet the expectations of teachers, parents, or especially peers. If they consistently feel less capable than others, they develop feelings of inferiority.
What does that look like?
According to Erickson, it can lead to things like low self-esteem, apathy, a reluctance to try new challenges. They might feel like there's no point in trying because they'll just fail anyway. Maybe they withdraw or become, as the source material puts it, that couch potato, just lacking engagement. This stage is so critical for discovering talents too, joining the band, playing sports, finding out you're good at math, or feeling like you don't measure up anywhere.
Wow.
Oh.
Okay, that leads us right into the storm of adolescence.
Indeed. Stage 5, fidelity. Identity versus role confusion. This is adolescence, roughly ages 12 to 18, but Erickson himself acknowledged the stage could stretch much longer, especially in complex modern societies.
This feels like the big one everyone talks about, the transition from childhood to adulthood. They're suddenly super aware of how others see them, and they're trying to figure out who they are deep down and where they fit in. The existential question is huge. Who am I, and who can I be?
Absolutely. This is the stage where Erickson coined the term identity crisis. And he saw it not as a bad thing, but as a necessary turning point. It's this intense period of cracking to integrate everything, the physical changes of puberty, their developing personality, their skills from the previous stage, past experiences and future possibilities into a coherent sense of self.
What are the key areas they need to figure out?
Erickson highlighted several: finding a vocational path, what kind of work might I do, figuring out their stance on politics and religion, understanding their gender role and sexuality, and basically reconciling the person they feel they are inside with the person society expects or allows them to be.
That sounds incredibly challenging. Our sources mentioned Erickson's idea of a psychosocial moratorium. What's that about?
It's basically society giving teenagers a bit of breathing room, a timeout period to experiment, trying on different roles, beliefs, styles, relationships without having to make lifelong commitments immediately. Think gap years, trying different college majors, exploring various social groups. It's a sanctioned period to find yourself.
And in societies where that's not really allowed, or for individuals who feel rushed.
It can make resolving the identity crisis much harder. The complexity of modern life with so many choices can also prolong this stage, sometimes well into the 20s or even 30s for some people.
So what's the positive outcome if they navigate this successfully?
They achieve a stable and integrated sense of identity, and this leads to the virtue of fidelity. Fidelity isn't just loyalty, it's the ability to be true to yourself and to make and sustain commitments to others, to ideals, to causes, even when things get complicated or values clash. It's about being reliable because you know who you are.
The negative outcome, role confusion.
That's when they just can't pull it all together. They have a fragmented sense of self, feel unsure about their place in the world, maybe drift from one thing to another without commitment, or sometimes even adopt a negative identity, like defining themselves by what they aren't or are against. It can lead to withdrawal or difficulty forming connections later.
Okay, before we jump into the adult stages, it's worth pausing here. For anyone listening, think about it. According to this model, you've already navigated these 5 crucial stages. The hope, will, purpose, competence, and fidelity you developed or struggled with before you were even 18, they're the psychological toolkit you're using right now to face the challenges of adult life.
That's a really important point. How well those foundations were built profoundly impacts everything that comes next.
All right, let's move into the adult years. The focus seems to shift here, doesn't it? Less about defining who I am and more about sharing that self, contributing, and eventually looking back on it all. Stage 6, love, intimacy versus isolation. This covers early adulthood, roughly 18 to maybe 39 years old. So you've hopefully figured out your identity in stage 5. Now what?
Now you're developmentally ready, Erickson argued, to fuse your identity with someone else's without fearing that you'll lose yourself in the process. The crisis is about forming deep, meaningful, committed relationships. It's about intimacy. The existential question is, can I unite myself with another person?
And intimacy here means more than just romance or sex, right?
Oh, much more. While it definitely includes finding a life partner for many, it also encompasses deep friendships, close family ties, any relationship characterized by mutual trust, reciprocity, vulnerability, and commitment. Successfully navigating this leads to the virtue of love. And for Erickson, love is this capacity for mutual devotion, a fusion of identities that enhances both people.
What happens if you can't achieve that?
Yes.
If you don't form those bonds?
The negative outcome is isolation. And this isn't just being physically alone. It's a psychological state, feeling alienated, disconnected, lonely, often stemming from a fear of commitment, a fear of being hurt, or perhaps an inability to compromise one's own identity, which might not have been fully solidified in stage 5.
That sounds painful. Our sources also mentioned something Erickson called distantiation. How does that fit in?
Distantiation is almost like a defense mechanism against the threat of intimacy or against people who seem different or dangerous to one's own fragile identity. If you're struggling with isolation, you might feel the need to push people away, to stereotype them, even to feel hostile towards groups or ideas that challenge you. It's the readiness to isolate or even destroy forces or people whose presence feels threatening. It comes from that pain and fear associated with failed intimacy.
And there's research backing this up, right? That link between stage 5 and 6.
Yes. James Marcia's work, which we'll touch on later maybe, provided empirical support showing that adolescents who achieved a clearer sense of identity were indeed much better equipped to form successful, intimate relationships in early adulthood. It really highlights that sequential building block nature of the theory.
Okay, so after finding love and connection, where do we go next?
Into the heart of adult life. Stage 7. Care. Generativity versus stagnation. This is middle adulthood, let's say roughly 40 to 64. The focus shifts outward again, quite dramatically. It's less about me and my partner and more about what am I contributing to the world, to the future. The big question becomes, can I make my life count? Can I guide the next generation?
Generativity. That sounds like generating things.
Exactly. It's about establishing and guiding the next generation. Most obviously, this happens through raising children. But Erickson was clear it's broader than that. It can be expressed through productive and meaningful work, creativity, teaching, mentoring, community involvement, activism, anything that contributes positively to society and leaves something of value behind.
And the virtue here is care.
Yes. Care. A widening concern for others, for the future, for the world you're going to leave behind. It's moving beyond self-interest.
This is where Erickson had that really interesting insight. That is not just kids needing adults, but adults actually need children, or at least engagement with the younger generation, to fully mature themselves.
He did argue that. Guiding the next generation forces you to confront your own values, your legacy. It's a crucial part of becoming a fully realized adult.
So what happens if someone doesn't find ways to be generative, if they turn inward instead?
They risk falling into stagnation. This is feeling unproductive, disconnected, self-absorbed, maybe bored or cynical. They might feel stuck, like their life lacks meaning. Sometimes this manifests as that classic midlife crisis, maybe trying desperately to recapture youth instead of embracing the generative role of middle age. It's a kind of psychological standstill.
And the sources pointed out this stage involves some really complex tasks beyond just work or kids.
Oh, absolutely. Middle adulthood is demanding. You're often juggling multiple roles, achieving mature civic and social responsibility, maintaining your partnership, finding new ways to express love, often dealing with aging parents, maybe even reversing roles and caring for them, while also launching your own children into independence and trying to step back from being the center of their lives. It's a huge amount to manage.
That definitely sets the scene for the final act.
It does. Stage 8. Wisdom. Ego integrity versus despair. This is late adulthood, 65 onwards. Retirement often happens here. Productivity naturally slows down. The primary task becomes reflection, looking back over the whole sweep of life. The crisis is an internal evaluation. Was my life meaningful? Am I okay with the person I became? The ultimate question. Is it okay to have been me?
Ego integrity, what does that feel like?
It's a sense of wholeness, of acceptance, looking back and feeling that your life, with all its ups and downs, successes and failures, made sense, had meaning. It's accepting your one and only life cycle as something that had to be and that, by necessity, permitted no substitutions. This acceptance brings the virtue of wisdom.
Wisdom, not just knowledge, but
More like a detached yet active concern with life itself, in the face of death itself. It brings a sense of peace, perspective, and allows one to face death without terror.
and the alternative. Despair.
Despair is the feeling that time is too short now, too short to start another life, too short to find alternative roads to integrity. It's looking back with significant regret, bitterness, feeling that life was wasted or unproductive. This often manifests as hopelessness, depression, perhaps a fear of death because life feels incomplete or unfulfilled. They might obsess over past mistakes or perceived wrongs done to them.
And Erickson beautifully ties this last stage back to the very first one, doesn't he? That idea of closing the circle.
He does. The integrity achieved by the older adult provides, as we discussed, a crucial foundation of hope and trust for the newest generation. It shows that a life lived fully can end in peace, not terror.
So the older person's wisdom nurtures the infant's hope.
Exactly. And we also see echoes of earlier stages here in late life. For example, as physical abilities decline, that old struggle for autonomy from stage 2 often resurfaces. The strong desire to remain independent, to not be reliant on others, can become a major preoccupation. And it's important to note, this stage's crisis can sometimes be triggered earlier, say by a terminal illness diagnosis, forcing that life review prematurely.
Okay, so for decades, that was the model. 8 stages. But then, as people started living longer and longer into their 80s and 90s, Erickson's wife, Joan, felt something was missing.
That's right. Joan Erickson, who was a crucial collaborator throughout Eric's career, felt that the challenges faced in very late old age, what she called the 90s and beyond, weren't fully captured by stage 8. She wrote about this in the extended version of The Life Cycle Completed, which she published when she herself was 93.
So she added a 9th stage. What defined this final stage?
She recognized that the sheer weight of physical decline, the increasing dependency, the loss of contemporaries, the shrinking world, these create a unique set of psychological demands. The mechanism she proposed is really quite striking and, honestly, a bit sobering.
How does it work?
Instead of a completely new crisis, she suggested that in this 9th stage, the crises of the first 8 stages are revisited, but with the negative pole, the dystonic aspect like mistrust, shame, guilt, inferiority becoming dominant, even for people who had successfully resolved those stages positively much earlier in life. It's like a psychological reversal driven by physiological decline.
Wow. Can you give some examples of how that plays out?
Sure. Take stage 1, trust versus mistrust. The very old person, who may have developed basic trust decades ago, now faces profound reasons to mistrust their own body. It becomes unreliable, failing senses, memory lapses, risk of falls, incontinence. They have to learn a new kind of mistrust, directed inward at their own failing capabilities.
That sounds incredibly difficult. What about stage 2, autonomy versus shamed out?
That hard-won autonomy of toddlerhood gets reversed. The loss of physical control, needing help with basic tasks like dressing or bathing, can bring back intense feelings of shame and doubt about their ability to function independently. It's facing the indignity of dependency.
And stage 4, industry versus inferiority.
The competence and industry they built through their working lives often fades. Joan Erickson wrote that feeling incompetent due to aging can be deeply belittling, making elders feel like unhappy small children of great age, echoing that earlier vulnerability to inferiority.
And I assume this culminates in the final stage, integrity versus despair.
Yes, she suggested that the peaceful retrospection associated with integrity often gets overshadowed in the 9th stage by a more pressing focus on immediate losses, physical disintegration, and the narrowing of possibilities. Despair can unfortunately gain the upper hand as capabilities diminish. Similarly, isolation might intensify as peers die off, and physical limitations make social connection harder, challenging the intimacy achieved earlier.
That paints a pretty bleak picture of extreme old age. Did she offer any hope within that?
She did, thankfully. Despite this difficult reversal of the earlier crises, Joan Erickson believed that the fundamental basic trust established way back in infancy could still persist, even if buried deep. That core sense that life fundamentally is okay could provide a final source of strength and resilience, a flicker of hope even amidst the losses.
It's a powerful addition, really acknowledging the unique struggles of very late life. Okay, so we have this comprehensive 9-stage model. But like any major theory, it's faced criticism, right? We need to look at that impartially.
Absolutely. No theory is perfect.
Yeah.
One of the most significant criticisms is potential cultural bias. Erickson developed his theory based largely on observations within Western, specifically European and American contexts, often focusing on male development in the mid-20th century.
So does it apply universally?
That's the question. Critics argue that the sequence, the specific crises, and particularly the virtues emphasized, like individual identity achievement in adolescence, might not map neatly onto experiences in non-Western, more collectivist cultures, where identity might be more defined by group membership or family roles than individual striving.
What of the sequence? Does everyone have to go through these in lockstep order? People seem to experience these things differently.
That's another common critique. Do you really have to resolve identity before you can tackle intimacy? We all know people who seem to manage both concurrently or maybe prioritize relationships before their career is fully set. Erickson's response generally was that while the stages represent the normative sequence, the conflicts themselves are present throughout life to some degree, just that one conflict becomes the central developmental task during a particular period.
So the identity versus role confusion tension might be strongest in adolescence, but it can definitely pop up again later in life.
Exactly. Like during a midlife career change or after retirement, he saw the stages as focal points, not rigid boxes.
Another critique, often aimed at broad psychoanalytic theories, is that they're great at describing what happens, but maybe less clear on how or why.
That's fair. The theory is very insightful descriptively, outlining the crises and virtues. But it can be somewhat vague on the specific mechanisms of change. What exactly does a person need to do to move from, say, stagnation to generativity? What specific experiences trigger the successful resolution of a crisis? The theory doesn't always provide a detailed process map for that transition.
But despite these criticisms, there is evidence supporting parts of their theory, isn't there?
Yeah.
Particularly that cumulative aspect.
Yes, there is. The work of researchers like James Marcia, who developed the identity statuses based on Erickson's stage 5, provided significant empirical backing. Marcia found clear correlations. Adolescents who explored options and made commitments, achieved identity, were demonstrably better adjusted and more capable of forming genuine intimate relationships, stage 6, than those who were still confused, hadn't explored, or just adopted identities given to them.
So that lends real weight to the idea that resolving one stage successfully does prepare you for the next one.
It strongly suggests that sequential, cumulative aspect holds true, at least for the transition from adolescence to early adulthood in the cultures studied. #outro project.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground. We've journeyed right through the human lifespan, from that absolute dependence and need for trust in infancy, through the intense search for identity, the drive to connect and contribute, all the way to the final reflections on a life lived, guided by Eric and Joan Erickson's stages. It really is an incredibly comprehensive way to think about our psychological journey.
It really is. And I think, the enduring value here isn't about rigidly slotting yourself or others into boxes. It's more about the framework, the lens it gives you. It helps make sense of why certain challenges feel so big at different times in life. It lets you see your current struggles maybe not just as isolated problems, but potentially as echoes of earlier unresolved issues or as preparation for what's coming next. It really highlights how those early experiences, getting enough hope, will, purpose, genuinely keep influencing your ability to find love or care decades down the line.
And that discussion of the ninth stage, wow. It's a stark reminder that development, or maybe adaptation, doesn't stop until life itself stops. And it often means grappling again with those very first conflicts, but under much harder circumstances. So here's something to think about as we wrap up. If that final stage, achieving integrity, requires looking back and feeling it was okay to have been me, which of these 9 core tensions, these fundamental psychosocial crises, do you feel is most active in your life right now? Is there a virtue from an earlier stage that feels a bit shaky, that might need some attention to help you build towards that final acceptance? What really stands out to you about the challenge Erickson identified for your current stage of life?